Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is a 1942 film, Now Voyager, directed by Irvin Rapper. Don't believe he was a rapper. Starring Bette Davis, Paul Henreid, Claude Rains, Gladys Cooper. This was recommended by Chris Mohan, who was involved in a Roninazarintalk discussion about cinema pre-1960, and he mentioned Now Voyager is a film that is well worth seeing, and I agree, because it's a film well worth seeing now that I've seen it. Even though it's a film that perhaps at a younger age probably wouldn't have liked as much. This was a film that was going along quite nicely as a kind of 4-star film out of 5, and then a line is spoken which kicks off about the last 20 minutes or so, and that line resonated really deeply with me, and it's just a sensational piece of work. Now, this is a melodrama, and melodramas, there's a thin line between melodramas that work and melodramas that are just too melodramatic. The score was done by Max Steiner, who actually won the Oscar for the score, and for me the score is terrible. The score is completely melodramatic. It's full of huge rises, and it's just so melodramatic, strangely enough. It's not subtle in any way. And again, if you are in a cynical mood, then maybe this film will be too melodramatic, because it hits all the melodrama notes, but helped by the performances and the really kind of sharp script, which has some great lines in it. It really powers through, and it is a melodrama that works. It works really well, for me at least. But again, I can see if you're perhaps in a slightly different mood, then it might not resonate, and it might just be too much of a melodrama. Because again, for me, there's a lot of melodramas that cross that line. Obviously in the olden days this was called a woman's picture, but I hate that term as well. It's just a great film, how you cut it. Again, Irving Rapper, he only made 22 films, or directed 22 films, none of which I'm that familiar with. Now Voyager was a big box office hit. It was from a novel by Olive Higgins Prouty, who's one of her previous novels. Stella Dallas, I believe the title was made into a film with Barbara Stanwyck. And it tells the story, I should actually get to the plot, shouldn't I? It tells the story of a spinster played by Bette Davis, who lives in this large house with her mother, played by Gladys Cooper, who just gives an amazing performance as this overbearing matriarch. Who's obviously greyed up to look older than she actually was. But she gives a tremendous performance. She will wind you up no end. And Bette Davis's character is in the midst of having a nervous breakdown. Her sister brings Claude Rains, who is a psychiatrist who runs this nice little retreat called Cascade. Prouty herself kind of had a nervous breakdown, trying to balance her personal life. She had lost some children and her writing career, so she ended up going to a similar place, or kind of place that Cascade's based on. And Claude Rains speaks to her and decides to take her away to Cascade for a brief period. There's a wonderful flashback as Bette Davis gives an example of when she was almost romantically linked, and how her mother shut her down, how her mother always tells her to wear glasses and wear proper clothes, and pretty much just completely controlled. It's a nice little picture postcard of parental abuse, of just domineering and dominating a person. She's always kind of introduced as the child that the mother didn't want, and she's pretty much the butt of everybody's jokes. Even her sister's daughter, who appears, pretty much just rips her the whole time and is digging at her. So she goes away to Cascade with Claude Rains, obviously in the same year as Casablanca, 1942, quite a good year for Claude Rains. So she goes on this cruise and she meets Paul Henreid's character, who again was with Claude Rains in Casablanca in the same year. And they kind of develop this relationship, even though he's married and is in an unhappy marriage, and he has a daughter that is obviously the introvert and obviously has issues and problems with his wife. And through this period in this cruise and the time that she's away from her dominating mother, she comes out of her shell and then has to go back to the family home. She still has Paul Henreid in her mind, and she is potentially getting married to a kind of safe character. Obviously her mother is upset when she comes back and she has like free will and actually wants to control her own life. She threatens her with money, and it's just, again, it's full of the tropes of melodrama. I mean, melodrama is not necessarily one of my favourite genres in the world, but again, there's a line that I'm not going to spoil. Obviously it's got a famous last line, which again I'm not going to spoil, but that's the famous last line. But the line where she comes back to her mother and she says it, and then she actually repeats it to herself again, because it has that kind of self-realisation of she actually has some power again. And then she gets involved back at Cascade with Paul Henreid's daughter, Tina, who has been sent there as well. And again, I'm not really going to go too much more into the plot and what happens, apart from to say it's just sensational. Again, if you're being cynical, you could say it's a little bit too long, but then you want to stay with Bette Davis's character for longer. So for me, the only real weakness is that score, which is just so melodramatic. It could have been dialed back a few notches, but again, to me, that's the only kind of minor gripe with it. You can let me know in the comments below what you think of the music, whether it's too much or whether it's just right for the subject matter. The Criterion disc is a region B. It's spine number 1004. Actually, a spine number you can read, which isn't always the case with Criterion, but that might just be my accent. The extras on it are really interesting. Also, you get the booklet and the disc. It does have nice colours. It's one of the nice colour packages by Criterion. There's an episode of the Dick Cavett Show from 1971 with Bette Davis, which, even if you're not a huge fan of the film, is probably actually worth buying the film in a sale, for example, just to get that interview, because it's absolutely fascinating. She talks about obviously going to court with Warner's because she was tired of getting not very meaty roles, so she talks about that. She talks about how contract players, actresses, sometimes would be put on a couch and have 15 actors or would-be actors come in to kiss them to see how good they were at kissing. They would just pretty much use actresses and actors like meat, essentially, because they owned them. She talks about the whole contract system, how she had suspensions. Same with, like, she mentioned Jimmy Cagney had about 18 suspensions because if you refused a role, they would add the time it takes to make that film onto your contract. So obviously, if you refused to make like 18 films, they would just add that on to the end of your contract. She mentions Olivia de Havilland and how they kind of made or helped to make it that the studios could only have you for a maximum of 7 years. That was the longest contract, regardless of suspensions and things like that. It's an absolutely fascinating conversation. You can see how she is driven, because as she says, she never wanted to be second best in the industry, because if she was, she would just go and do something else. And again, there is comments about how there doesn't seem to be people like Bette Davis about, and that's a fair point, because again, people ask, why are films today perhaps not as good as films in the olden days? And it's a simple one-word answer, and that's just talent. The talent in general is just not the same as the talent that was back in the day. In a bizarre kind of poignant moment during the interview, she does actually say that Gladys Cooper, the co-star of Now Voyager, actually died the night before the interview, which is kind of eerie, and again, strange that I obviously picked this interview to put on this disc. So that's like an amazing interview with Bette Davis. There's also an interview with Paul Heinrich from 1980. There's a select scene commentary on the film score, which I kind of had to laugh about, because for me it's not very good. Or it's not as sophisticated as the actual script is. The script's a bit deeper than the melodramatic score. There's a new interview with film critic Fallon Smith-Nehem on making of the film, which again is really good and goes into Bette Davis's background, coming from the stage where your looks weren't necessarily the most important thing, and of course coming to Hollywood where it's pretty much mostly about your looks. And there's an interview with costume historian Larry McQueen about obviously the costumes in the film, as Bette Davis's character essentially goes from quote-unquote ugly duckling, which is mentioned in the film. I mean, again, you could argue, especially with Henright's daughter Tina, who Bette Davis helps near the end of the film, which is absolutely wonderful. But again, she helps her become like a normal girl. For me, being an outsider and being not the same as everybody else is something that should actually be celebrated. So there is like a bit of an undercurrent in the film about, you know, conforming and, you know, getting married, having children, which to me has always been outdated and strange. But I think as the years go by, that's perhaps something that ages the film a little bit. But then at the end of the day, most people do want to conform, most people do want to be accepted. People don't really want to stick out as much because it's easier to be picked off by the predator with the big sharp teeth. So that's an interesting kind of subplot, especially with Tina, who again is a young 12, 13-year-old girl who's struggling with her identity and struggling with her place in the world. And it does seem that the answer is, you know, become normal, whatever the hell that is. But it is just a stunning film. Again, for me, it was kind of chugging along nicely. It's a 4-star film, and then that one line really resonated with me, and then the last 20 minutes is just absolutely amazing. So for me, it's a 5-star film. Obviously, I'll be rewatching it at some point, but really impressive. Bette Davis is phenomenal as she kind of transforms. But again, like all great actors, it's about her eyes and what her eyes are doing a lot of the time. Paul Henry is good. Claude Rains is Claude Rains as always. That little twinkle in his eye. It's just a brilliant film. Again, Irving Rapper, not somebody that I'm that familiar with. Again, I looked up his discography, I was going to say, and nothing really stood out. But again, you can let me know in the comments for any other Irving Rapper gems. You know, the direction, you know, isn't spectacular or anything. He does put the camera in the right place, but this is really an actor's film, and the script, you know, even the kind of sassy nurse of Bette Davis's mother, Gladys Cooper, has some great moments and great lines. The supporting cast's wonderful. It's just a wonderful film, and I would highly recommend it. And you can check out the Roninazarintalk episode about cinema before 1960. You can also check out Chris Mohan's channel. Go subscribe, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. So let me know what you think of now Voyager, another wonderful Criterion release, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films saying cheerio.